I have a question for you. One I learned to carry like a coin in the pocket of a uniform. Small, unassuming, but always there when your fingers need something to hold. What if the person your own family mocked as a failure, the one they cut out of the photographs, and the will and the Sunday dinners, turned out to be the only one who could save hundreds of lives in a single impossible hour at 36,000 feet? Would you believe that person? Would you trust that story? Or would you do what many people do with women like me? Tilt your head, doubt the edges, and call it luck. Before I take you into the heart of what happened, I want to ask you for something simple. If stories like this matter to you, stories about women who served, about quiet grit and the long shadows of family, you can help more people find them. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Around here, we tell the kind of truths that rarely make the highlight reels. We light a lantern for anyone who has ever been underestimated, and we keep it burning. My name is Maya Torres. Once, that name meant problem. It meant review her file again. It meant not invited handwritten at the bottom of a family email chain. I was an Air Force pilot, then a veteran wearing the invisible map of places I couldn't talk about. To my sister, Clara, I was a walking inconvenience, a reminder that the world wasn't just boardrooms and bonuses. And yet in the sky, where the rules are stripped down to physics and breath, my name became something else. Not legend, not miracle, something simpler. It became the steady voice you need when everything you rely on starts to fail. The beginning is a kind of winter, a November that never warmed, a funeral for our father, who used to tell stories about the hum of engines and the small discipline of keeping your boots shined. The church was full of acquaintances and clients who liked him when deals closed and disappeared when they didn't. Clara stood at the front, polished as a trophy, speaking in the kind of sentences that sound like comfort and land like press releases. In all that air, my name didn't exist. You can be erased by silence. You can be rewritten by it. After, there was a room and a table and a lawyer who had learned how to make compassion look expensive. The will was brief, clinical. Clara's name was a constant. Mine came once, attached to a small envelope and a pocket watch, the old kind you wind with a thumb, the kind that ticks loud in a quiet hand. Clara leaned in close enough that I could count the diamonds on her bracelet. "You see," she said softly, like she was telling me a secret that could still be undone. "You got something sentimental. It suits you. Sentimental is what people call courage when it doesn't look like theirs." That night I lay awake in a hotel room that smelled like other people's perfumes and decided to leave on the first flight in the morning. Paris to New York, a straight line on a map that always looks easier than the air it crosses. Clara insisted we travel together. It would look strange. She said if we didn't. There are entire lives arranged around how things look. I won't tell you everything that happened up there. Not yet. That is what the rest of this story is for. The slow unspooling of a day I didn't think would belong to the rest of my life. I will say this, when metal groans, it is like a decision your body is making without you. When a cabin drops and oxygen masks tumble like surrender flags, you learn the exact weight of the words you've been told about yourself. Broken, unstable, too much, not enough. And somewhere in the middle of the noise you hear another voice, one you almost forgot belonged to you. Fly the plane. We were at cruising altitude. The air outside was the kind that turns contrails into chalk streaks. Inside, the world changed by degrees, a tremor that could have been turbulence, a scent that could have been nothing. Then the pitch, sharp, wrong, and the way people looked at each other, searching for faces that could tell them the truth. The first scream was small, like a match scratch. The second was wider. Clara went quiet in a way I had never seen. Money can buy a lot of things. It cannot purchase oxygen from a broken line. Here is a confession I don't make easily. I am not fearless. That word is often assigned to us like a medal we didn't ask for. I am, instead, practiced. In checklists. In managing panic as if it were weather, real, undeniable, and something you can still fly through if you understand it. My hands remember what my mind sometimes tries to unlearn, power to idle, trim to counter, eyes forward, breathe. There are ways to survive that look like rules and feel like prayer. None of that would have mattered if I hadn't stood up. If I had stayed buckled into a life my sister assigned me. If I had listened to every closed door, every narrowed eye, every meeting where someone quoted my evaluation and ignored my hours. But I stood. I walked the aisle past people whose names I would never learn and tried not to think about the ones I would. The crew met my eyes, measuring. You can tell when someone is out of miracles. It shows in their hands. I paused here, not on the plane, here with you, because if you've ever wondered what redemption sounds like, I can tell you. It isn't applause, not first. It is the quiet after fear goes loud. It is the single inhale you take when you decide to move. It is your own body choosing you. To this day, I can still hear my father's watch in my pocket. That steady ticking that meant something kept working. That sound followed me to the cockpit door, where a flight attendant with a calm voice and shaking fingers whispered, "Can you help?" 4 words that turned a life around. 4 words that untied a family's narrative like a knot that wasn't so tight after all. I won't tell you what I saw in the cockpit yet. Not because I am dangling a mystery you didn't earn, but because I want you to understand what it cost, what it gave back, and the long ribbon of consequence that would come later. There was a day after the landing. There were days. In some of them, people wanted to call me a hero. In others, they wanted to call me a liability. Both words can be cages. Both can be weapons. What matters is the pilot in between. Let me pull back for a moment and tell you who I was before all this. It will make the rest make sense. I was the kid who stood under the flight path of cargo birds and counted seconds between engine thunder and the wind's reply. I was the teenager who learned that grief can show up early and sit where you least want it. I joined the Air Force because the sky made more sense than any room I'd ever been asked to occupy. Up there, people don't ask you to be smaller. They ask you to be precise. There's mercy in that. But the mercy of the sky does not always translate to land. After my last deployment, I carried the kind of invisible weight that makes you look fine and sleep like you're fighting ghosts. The review board used words that sounded neutral and cut like glass. Temporary. Evaluate. Clearance pending. I did the therapy, the tests, the awkward conversations with strangers who held pens like scalpels. I got my green light. Still, the stain of doubt has a way of sticking to a woman's name like smoke. Clara kept a copy of my evaluation, just in case. When you've lived long enough with your worth measured in someone else's metrics, you can begin to mistake their yardstick for your own. That was my mistake. Believing that my sister's judgment or an initialed line on a form was the boundary of who I could be. Then the boundary tore open at 36,000 feet, and the only thing left to do was step through. If you stay with me, if you sit in the seat beside mine for the length of this story, you will hear how the investigation unfolded, with all its sharp edges and tidy memos. You will hear what truths money couldn't bury. You will hear about Clara and the choices she made in rooms she thought I would never enter. But I want to be honest about something. This is not a courtroom drama, not really. It is not even a revenge story in the way audiences are trained to expect. I don't have a speech that breaks her into pieces. I have a landing. I have a life that kept going. There are things we'll circle back to. The pocket watch. The smell that wasn't a smell until it was. The way the second officer met my eyes and found a different kind of rank there. The language of alarms. The math of runways too short and hearts too full. The sentence I said into a headset that I will remember until whatever years I have left are done. And then the silence. Not the awful silence that follows disaster. The other kind. The kind that feels like an answer even when no one asked a question. If you're still with me, I'm grateful. These openings matter. The way a story starts can tell you everything about how it will end. Here is what I can promise. It won't end in fire, not this time. It won't even end in the roar of applause or the clatter of headlines. It will end the way true things often do, in the quiet turning of a key in a door you once believed was sealed, in the sound of wings you thought belonged to someone else, and in the first breath of a young woman who never knew she would find herself in a cockpit because someone like me chose to go on. I want to return, briefly, to the girl I used to be. She would stand at the edge of airfields after school and trace the arc of landing lights with her finger as if she could stitch herself to them. She thought flying would save her. She was wrong. Flying didn't save me. It revealed me. It put me in a place where the only way out was through. And in that through, I found something unbreakable. Clara would tell you that power is measured in assets and titles and whose name sits on which plaque. Maybe that's true in her world. In mine, power is the ability to steady a shaking hand and say, "I've got it," when everyone else is looking for a leader and finding a mirror. In my world, power is the ability to forgive yourself for surviving. It is also the ability to keep your mouth closed when every bruise on your soul wants to speak first. What you'll see, if you come with me into the body of this story, is not a perfect soldier. You'll see a woman who made mistakes, who sat in cheap apartments counting pills and reasons, who couldn't always tell the difference between being alone and being free. You'll see a sister who still wanted to be loved by someone who had no intention of loving her. You'll see a pilot who knew the book and still had to trust the stubborn muscle of instinct. And you'll see what happens when all of that collides with fire. There is a moment I keep for myself. I won't give it to you yet. Later, yes. For now, I'll tell you only that it involves the color of the sky right before cloud, and the way the body knows when it's about to be hurt and decides to move anyway. I carry it like a photograph that never fades. In it, I am not fearless. I am not noble. I am simply willing. I've learned, too, that people love endings in which the bad sister is publicly shamed, the good sister is publicly praised, and everyone learns the right lesson in time for dinner. Life resists that kind of choreography. The consequences came quietly, in boardrooms where my name was once a ghost and became a case number. The vindication came in the mail, not in a parade. The apology didn't come at all, not with words. But there was a day, a door, and a girl who shared Clara's cheekbones and none of her certainty. And that, in its way, was enough. If this sounds like a story about women in uniform, it is. If it sounds like a story about sisters, it is also that. But mostly, it is a story about a question I began with and can finally answer. Can the person your own family dismissed be the one who saves the day? Yes. Not because fate chooses the underestimated as a hobby, but because underestimation is a kind of training. You learn to do the work without the clapping. You learn to keep your eye on the horizon while the world argues with itself behind you. You learn to fly the plane. We're almost ready to push back from the gate. Before we do, one last thing. If this opening found you, if you recognized yourself in the quiet places of it, consider joining this community. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that the sky isn't just for the ones with the right last name. Around here, we don't sell perfect endings. We tell the truth and look for the grace inside it. I am Maya Torres. And if you're willing, I'll show you how a pocket watch, a broken family, and a sky on fire taught me that the most profound revenge is not a victory shouted from a podium. It is a life lived so steadily, so honestly that silence becomes the loudest sound in the room. Now, buckle in. The seat belt sign is on. We are climbing. I have often wondered if grief has a smell. Some say it is the sting of lilies, too sweet and heavy for any air that wants to be clean. Others say it is candle wax, or damp wool coats pressed shoulder to shoulder in pews. For me, grief has always smelled like metal, like the tang of blood in the air after a battlefield, or the bite of iron rails in winter. That morning, as I stepped into the church for my father's funeral, the air was thick with flowers and whispers, but beneath it, I swore I could still smell iron. Perhaps because grief is a war of its own. Perhaps because I walked into that sanctuary armed with nothing but memory and silence. The church was filled with people who loved my father's name more than they ever loved the man. Business partners, politicians, neighbors who had once borrowed sugar but never came by again. They sat in rows, their coats expensive, their expressions curated, as if grief were a performance and they were determined to play their roles well. I stood near the back, not because I wanted distance, but because I had long ago learned that in my family, that was where I belonged. On the margins, on the edge, watching, never claimed. My sister Clara was impossible to miss. She always was. Even in mourning, she dressed like she was preparing for a magazine cover, her black suit tailored within an inch of its life, her pearls like a string of cold moons around her throat. She walked to the pulpit with the certainty of someone who believed the world existed to listen. And they did. They leaned forward, nodding as she spoke about our father's legacy, his empire, his discipline, his vision. She spoke of the company he built, the fortunes he secured, the name he left behind. But in all her polished sentences, there was no mention of the man who sat by my bedside after nightmares, or the man who mailed me handwritten notes to Afghanistan with lines that said, "I'm proud of you, kid." In Clara's version, those details didn't exist, and in her version, neither did I. I sat stiff in the pew, my uniform a memory rather than a garment. I could still feel its weight on my shoulders, the patches, the wings. I had served, but you would never know it here. To this crowd, I was Clara's troubled younger sister, the one whispered about after deployments, the one with the psychological reviews, the one who never quite fit. Every family has its scapegoat, its shadow. I was theirs, and shadows do not speak at funerals. When the service ended, people filed past me without recognition. Some nodded politely, others avoided my eyes altogether, as though my grief might be contagious. Clara was the star. I was the ghost. I could have left right then, slipped into the gray afternoon, and never looked back. But grief is not tidy, and neither is family. There was still the will to be read. Still one more ceremony of exclusion waiting for me. The lawyer's office smelled of leather and dust, the kind of place where secrets wear ties. Clara sat at the head of the long table, her legs crossed, her expression cool. I sat opposite, my palms damp against the wooden armrests, the pocket of my jacket empty, waiting for whatever scraps were deemed appropriate. The lawyer cleared his throat, shuffled papers, and began. It was brief, precise, devoid of sentiment. The bulk of my father's estate, his businesses, his properties, his investments, went to Clara. My name appeared once, attached to a small envelope. Inside was a pocket watch, old and scarred, the kind my father used to wind absent-mindedly on the porch during summers. It ticked softly, steady as breath. Clara leaned toward me, her smile a blade wrapped in silk. "A sentimental piece," she murmured, as if the word itself were a condemnation. "It suits you. You were always the one chasing feelings rather than facts." She tilted her head, letting the diamonds in her earrings catch the light. "You see, Maya, Father wanted his legacy to be in capable hands. You understand, don't you? After all, you've never really been stable enough for responsibility." Her words should not have stung. I had heard variations of them my entire life. but grief loosens the skin around old wounds, makes them bleed as if they were fresh. I closed my hand around the watch until the edges pressed into my palm. It was not money, not power, not a company. It was smaller, quieter. And yet it was everything. Because in giving me this watch, my father was giving me time, his trust, his unspoken belief that despite what the world said, he had seen me. Maybe not in boardrooms, maybe not in wills, but in the quiet hours where truth lives. Have you ever been cut out of your own family's story? Have you ever sat in a room where your name was spoken like an afterthought, while another's name filled every line? If you have, then you know the peculiar ache of erasure. If you haven't, I hope you never do. But if you're listening, nodding, remembering your own silences, then you know why I held that watch as though it were oxygen. I didn't argue. What would be the point? Clara thrived on conflict, and I was too tired to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I slipped the watch into my jacket, stood, and left the room. Outside, the November air was sharp enough to make my eyes water. Or maybe it wasn't the air at all. As I walked down the stone steps, I thought of my father, of the nights I'd returned from missions, my nerves frayed, my hands trembling, and how his voice had been the only one to anchor me. He hadn't been perfect, no father is, but he had known me. He had seen me when no one else bothered to look. And now, even in death, he had reached out once more, a small gesture, a small gift, but sometimes small things carry the weight of survival. I paused on the sidewalk, the city moving around me indifferent. Cars honked, people hurried past in scarves and boots. Life didn't stop for grief, it never does. I pulled out the watch and wound it, listening to the click, the tick, the soft heartbeat of memory. And in that moment, I whispered to myself, one day Clara will learn. One day the world will see. One day I will not be erased. Do you know what it feels like to make such a vow? To whisper it not as anger, but as a promise you tuck into your bones. It is not about revenge. Not really. It is about survival. About claiming the dignity that others tried to strip away. I didn't know then how quickly that vow would be tested. I didn't know the sky itself was waiting. But the watch ticked on, steady, patient, reminding me that time has its own way of revealing truths. I wish I could tell you that walking out of that law office was the end of it, that I simply tucked the watch into my pocket, shook off Clara's disdain, and went on with my life. But wounds do not end where doors close. They travel with you. They sit in the backseat of taxis, follow you into empty hotel rooms, lie down beside you when the night turns long. And grief, when mixed with shame, is a poison that doesn't drain easily. It lingers, staining everything it touches. I took the train back across the city, the window glass a blur of lights and buildings I didn't really see. What I saw instead were memories, looping like reels in my head, the kind the mind plays when it refuses to sit quietly. Afghanistan. Dust that clung to your skin no matter how many showers you took. Heat that pressed against you like a hand you couldn't shake off. The constant hum of engines overhead, the rhythmic thud of helicopters, the silence that was never truly silence because underneath it was always the waiting for the next blast, the next call, the next moment when everything could shatter. There are things they don't tell you when you sign up. They tell you about discipline, honor, courage. They tell you about duty and sacrifice. They don't tell you about how the body keeps count of every explosion, every hour you spend bracing, every breath that feels borrowed. They don't tell you that years later, sitting in a quiet train car, you will hear a child laugh, and somehow it will echo like mortar fire in your chest. They don't tell you how long it takes to convince your own nervous system that you are safe, even when the world around you insists you are. I looked down at my hands. They were steady now, but they hadn't always been. There were nights when they trembled so badly I couldn't hold a glass of water without spilling. Nights when the watch my father gave me might as well have been a bomb, its ticking loud enough to make my heart race. That's the part people don't see. They see the medals, the folded flag, the crisp uniform. They don't see the woman lying awake at 3 a.m., whispering into the dark, "Just breathe, Maya. Just breathe." Do you know what it feels like to carry invisible scars? The kind no one applauds you for, the kind that don't earn standing ovations or parades. If you do, then you know why I sometimes felt like a ghost, even in my own body. If you don't, then I hope these words help you understand those who walk among you every day, smiling politely while their hearts fight silent battles. Clara never understood. She never wanted to. To her, my service was a blemish, not a badge. She once told me in a voice meant to sound sympathetic, "You've always been fragile, Maya, sensitive, not really cut out for the harshness of the world." I laughed then, a bitter sound, because the deserts I walked in, the skies I flew through, the friends I buried, those were the harshest corners of the world. Fragile doesn't survive there. But Clara, wrapped in her glass towers and cocktail parties, believed herself the strong one. She had applause. She had headlines. She had power measured in stock portfolios and perfect photographs. And me, I had silence. I had the weight of things no one wanted to talk about. That contrast only sharpened at the funeral. People clasped Clara's hands, whispered their admiration, praised her composure. "You're carrying this family with such grace," one woman said, pressing a tissue into Clara's hand as though grief were a performance she had nailed. No one turned to me. No one said, "Maya, you carried our flag through war zones. Maya, you survived what most cannot imagine." Their eyes slid past me as though I were the shadow my sister had always painted me to be. And yet I had the watch. I had that small circle of brass and glass, ticking faithfully in my pocket, proof that someone had seen me. My father, whatever his flaws, had chosen to give me the only piece of himself that kept time. He could have left me nothing. He could have joined Clara in her erasure, but he hadn't. And that mattered more than all the real estate portfolios in the world. Still, the bitterness lingered. I found myself walking into the night, the city lights blurring like tracer fire, my thoughts circling back to moments I wished I could forget. The ambush outside Kandahar. The radio static right before we realized it was jammed. The sound of a friend's voice cutting off mid-sentence. The dust storm that swallowed our convoy whole, leaving us blind and deaf and convinced we would never see daylight again. I had lived through all of that, and yet somehow it was Clara's judgment that still had the power to gut me. Isn't it strange how the people who should know us best can wound us deepest? How their words can feel heavier than bullets, sharper than shrapnel? Have you felt that too? The sting of being dismissed by someone whose approval you once craved? If so, then maybe you understand why I clenched that watch in my hand until the edge bit into my skin. Pain was something I could manage. Indifference was harder. Back in the hotel room, I sat by the window, watching the traffic below, and thought about how two sisters could grow up in the same house and live in two different worlds. Clara had always been the golden child, honor roll, homecoming queen, the one my mother boasted about at Bridge Club. I was the quiet one, the tomboy, the girl who stayed up late reading maps and books about planes, dreaming of skies instead of parties. I left for the Air Force at 18, desperate to prove that I could be more than the sensitive one. Clara stayed, inherited, grew roots in the soil of approval. We had been walking opposite directions ever since. Sometimes I wondered if she envied me, even as she mocked me. Not the sleepless nights, not the scars, but the fact that I had stepped into a world she could never comprehend. Clara's battles were fought in boardrooms. Mine were fought under foreign suns. Both were wars in their own ways, but only one of us came home with ghosts. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window and whispered, "You don't get to define me, Clara." The city didn't answer, but the ticking in my pocket did. Tick, 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 a reminder, a metronome of memory. A promise that time has a way of leveling truths. Maybe you felt that too, that small ember inside you, even when the world tries to drown it. That whisper that says, "Not today, not like this." Not forever. If you have, then you know why I didn't throw the watch away, why I didn't let Clara's sneer define me. You know why I held on. The days after the funeral blurred. People left town, flowers wilted, condolences dried up. Clara went back to her towers and her empire. I stayed in the city, lingering longer than I meant to, because something in me wasn't finished. I didn't know what yet. I only knew that grief has a way of cracking open doors you thought were sealed, and I was standing in a hallway of memory, unsure which way to turn. But the truth is, sometimes the direction chooses you. Sometimes it comes in the form of a plane ticket. Sometimes it comes with the quiet insistence of fate, waiting in the departure gate of an airport you've walked 100 times before. I didn't know it then, sitting in that hotel room with the city humming below me, but the sky was already calling. And this time, it would not be routine. This time, it would be fire. The days after the funeral blurred into one another, gray on gray, like pages in a book no one wanted to read. I should have left Paris sooner, but something in me resisted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was the quiet rebellion of refusing to march to Clara's timeline, even when she wasn't in the room. Still, by the end of that week, I knew it was time to go home. I packed my small suitcase with the precision that never really leaves you once you've worn the uniform. Fold, align, tighten. Order where the world feels chaotic. The watch went in last, resting in a side pocket, close enough that I could touch it if I needed to. I paused over it, tracing the worn metal, and whispered, "We're going home, Dad." It sounded foolish, maybe, but grief makes children of us all. The hotel lobby smelled of polish and perfume as I checked out, dragging my case behind me. Outside, Paris was restless with winter. People hurried past, bundled in scarves, clutching coffees, chasing schedules. I watched them for a moment and thought how easy it must be to live without the weight of memory pressing down. Do you ever catch yourself envying strangers like that, wondering how it feels to move through the world unscarred? The cab ride to Charles de Gaulle felt longer than it was. My thoughts tangled, darting between the silence of the funeral and the dust storms of Afghanistan, between Clara's cold smile and the warmth of my father's letters, between who I had been and who I was supposed to be. The city slipped away behind me, lights fading into the kind of horizon that always makes you feel like you're leaving more than just geography. At the terminal, Clara was already waiting. She stood near the check-in counter, elegant as ever, her coat belted perfectly, her heels clicking with authority. She spotted me and her expression tightened, as if the sight of me arriving on time somehow inconvenienced her. "You packed light," she remarked, her tone dripping with that effortless superiority she had perfected since childhood. "Figures. You never really had much to your name." I didn't rise to the bait. Years in uniform had taught me the value of silence in the face of provocation. Still, the words slid under my skin, lodging where they always did, in that tender place between pride and ache. We moved through security together, side by side, but worlds apart. Clara breezed through as though airports existed to serve her. I trudged, my boots heavy on the tile, my ID scrutinized just a little longer, my eyes catching on every uniformed officer as though I were still reporting for duty. The contrast was sharp, undeniable. Clara the polished, Clara the admired, Maya the watched, Maya the questioned. On the way to the gate, she spoke of business, of inheritance, of meetings she would attend as soon as we landed. Not once did she mention the funeral. Not once did she say our father's name. I listened because sometimes silence is a shield, and because part of me knew she wanted me to break. Wanted me to argue, to lash out, to confirm the narrative she had built of me as unstable. I would not give her that. Not here, not now. The boarding call came, and with it that familiar flutter in my chest. Not fear, not excitement, something else. A premonition, maybe, the kind you learn to trust after years in combat zones. The body knows when the air is about to shift. The body knows when danger is near. Do you believe that? Do you trust those instincts? I've learned I must. They've saved me more times than I can count. We stepped onto the jet bridge, the hum of engines thrumming faintly through the floor. The smell of recycled air, of fuel, of possibility. For Clara, it was routine. For me, every plane is both a sanctuary and a trigger. I have spent too many hours inside steel birds not to feel both. Our seats were in first class. Naturally, Clara would accept nothing less. She slipped into hers with the entitlement of someone settling onto a throne. I sat beside her, folding my jacket carefully, keeping the watch close. The cabin crew smiled, polite but tired, their eyes flicking over us with practiced assessment. To them, we were just two passengers, another pair of sisters, perhaps, traveling home. They couldn't see the battlefield between us, invisible but sharp. As the cabin filled, I studied the people around me. The businessman already tapping away on his laptop. The young couple holding hands, whispering promises of a vacation well spent. The mother soothing her restless toddler. Ordinary lives, stitched together by one flight number, one shared stretch of sky. None of them knew how fragile that sky could be. None of them knew how quickly routine could turn to catastrophe. But I knew. I had lived it. The doors closed. The seatbelt sign chimed. The engines roared to life, vibrating through the floor, steady and powerful. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing deep, centering myself. But beneath the mechanical hum, I swore I heard something else, a whisper, faint but insistent, like the tick of the watch in my pocket, warning, reminding, urging. Clara leaned toward me then, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise. "Try not to embarrass yourself, Maya. This is a long flight. Don't make it longer." I turned to look at her, really look, and for the first time I saw not power, not perfection, but fear. It was buried deep, masked by arrogance, but it was there. And I thought one day, Clara, that fear will find you. One day masks will crack. The plane surged forward, pressing us back into our seats. Paris fell away beneath us, lights scattered like broken glass. We climbed into the night, into the dark, into the unknown. And though none of us knew it yet, the sky was already writing its own script. Takeoffs always feel the same at first. The pressure of acceleration, the subtle lift as wheels leave Earth, the strange miracle of trusting tons of metal to carve through the sky. To most passengers, it's a moment to close eyes, to sigh, to slip into sleep or anticipation. But for me, someone who once lived in cockpits, who once measured safety in altimeters and checklists, takeoffs are never just routine. They are promises. They are questions. Will the air hold us? Will the engines trust us long enough to bring us back? That night, climbing into the dark sky above Paris, I held my breath as the city lights scattered beneath us like broken jewels. Clara was beside me, scrolling on her phone, perfectly unbothered. She didn't look out the window. She never did. Clara had always been too consumed with her own reflection to notice the world outside. She glanced up just long enough to smirk. "Try not to embarrass me, Maya. I'd hate for the flight attendants to think my sister can't handle herself on a plane." Her words were quiet enough that no one else heard, but sharp enough to sting. I bit my tongue. Years of service had taught me that silence can be armor. But inside, I felt the old ache again, the ache of being dismissed, diminished, erased. Do you know that feeling? That tight coil in your chest when someone you love wields cruelty like a casual habit. If you do, then you understand why I gripped the pocket watch in my jacket like a talisman. Tick, tick, each second whispering, hold steady, hold steady. The cabin settled as the plane leveled off. Flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisles, offering drinks, smiling as if turbulence and tragedy had never touched them. Around us, passengers unfolded newspapers, adjusted pillows, sank into the illusion of safety. Clara ordered champagne. I asked for water. She laughed. Always so dull, Maya, even here. I turned my face to the window where the horizon stretched endless and black. To me, water wasn't dull. It was clarity. It was discipline. It was survival. But Clara wouldn't understand that. She never had. Hours passed in a strange suspension. The cabin dimmed. The hum of engines softened into a lullaby that carried most passengers towards sleep. But for me, the hum was never background. It was the lifeline, the heartbeat of the machine that carried us. And as the minutes turned, something in that hum shifted. It was subtle at first, a note off-key in a familiar song. My body knew it before my mind did. Years of flying teach you to hear trouble in whispers. Then it came, the jolt. Not violent, not yet. Just enough to wake the dozing, to make glasses clink and eyes blink open. Clara frowned, annoyed, as though turbulence were a personal insult. "First class should be smoother than this," she muttered, loud enough for the flight attendant passing by. The woman smiled tightly, practiced, and moved on. Another jolt. Stronger. This one sent a ripple through the cabin, a murmur rising like wind before a storm. I felt my pulse quicken, my training kicking in. This wasn't turbulence, not the usual kind. There was a rhythm to it, a stutter, something mechanical, something wrong. And then the sound. A sharp bang from the left side, followed by a flash that lit the window. Gasps, screams, the smell of smoke seeping in, acrid and undeniable. The engine had taken a hit. Bird strike, that was my first thought. I'd seen it before during training runs, when flocks cut through skies at the wrong moment. Engines aren't invincible. They are hungry mouths, and when they swallow what they shouldn't, they choke. The cabin lights flickered. Oxygen masks dropped with a collective thud, swinging like pale ghosts. The hum of conversation broke into chaos, cries, prayers, the sharp command of flight attendants urging passengers to stay calm. But calm is a foreign language when fire whispers outside your window. I turned to Clara. For the first time in my life, I saw her stripped bare. No pearls, no polish, just raw, unmasked fear. Her lips trembled. Her hand clutched the armrest so tightly her knuckles whitened. She looked at me not with disdain, not with superiority, but with something I had never seen before, dependence. The intercom crackled. A voice strained, tight with effort. "This is your first officer. We've experienced an engine failure. Please remain seated and secure your oxygen masks. We are assessing the situation." Assessing. A word meant to soothe, but to me, it carried the edge of desperation. Assessing meant bleeding altitude, scanning panels, running emergency checklists faster than thought. Assessing meant the captain wasn't speaking, and that was wrong. I felt my stomach drop. I'd been in cockpits enough to know silence where there shouldn't be silence. If the captain wasn't speaking, something had happened. Something worse. The plane dipped. A collective scream rose and fell with the motion. Clara grabbed my arm, nails digging through fabric. "Do something," she cried, her voice breaking. And for a moment, I wanted to laugh. The irony was almost too much. For years, she had called me broken, unstable, useless. And now, 37,000 feet above the Atlantic, with metal screaming and fire licking at the wing, she wanted me to save her. I didn't laugh. I didn't gloat. Training leaves no room for that. Instead, I leaned close and said, "Breathe. Stay still. Let me think." My voice was calm, steady, the voice drilled into me by endless hours of simulation and sweat, the voice of survival. The cabin crew rushed past, their faces pale, their movements sharp. One attendant glanced at me, eyes wide, whispering, "The captain's down. The first officer's hurt. He's trying, but—" Her words cut off in a shake of her head. And I knew. I knew the truth before she said it. There was no one left to fly this plane. Tell me, what would you do in that moment? Sitting in a seat that was supposed to hold you safe, realizing the people trusted to carry you through the sky were broken, bleeding, or gone. Would you pray? Would you freeze? Would you scream? Or would you, like me, feel that old fire ignite again, the one the world tried to put out but never could? I felt it then. That shift. That clarity. The world narrowing to a single choice. Sit still and become a passenger to disaster, or stand and reclaim the part of me I had been told to bury. I unclipped my seatbelt. Clara gasped. "Where are you going?" "To the cockpit," I said simply. And with those words, everything changed. The aisle stretched before me like a gauntlet. Every eye seemed to follow as I rose from my seat, steady in a way that felt almost defiant. People clutched their masks, their prayers, their children. Fear has a sound. It's the rustle of fabric, the catch of breath, the whispered "please, please" repeated like a mantra. I walked through it, one step at a time, feeling each gaze pressing against my back like weight I had carried before. A flight attendant rushed toward me, her face tight with panic. "Ma'am, please sit down." "I'm trained," I said quickly, my voice low but firm. "I flew for the Air Force. If your captain is down and your first officer is injured, you need me." She froze, eyes wide, hope flickering there like a match struck in darkness. For a moment, I saw her battle between protocol and survival. Then she nodded once, sharp, decisive. "Follow me." The cockpit door loomed ahead, thick and locked, built to protect against the world but never meant to guard against fate. The attendant keyed in a code, and the heavy door clicked open. The sound echoed in my bones. It felt like stepping into another life. Inside, the air was hotter, sharper, tinged with the metallic bite of overheated systems. The panels glowed, flashing warnings in angry red and amber. The first officer was slumped forward, blood trailing down his temple, one arm limp, the other gripping the yoke with trembling determination. He looked up as I entered, his eyes clouded with pain, relief, and disbelief all at once. "Who?" His voice was hoarse, strained. "Maya Torres," I said, sliding into the right-hand seat. The straps, the switches, the feel of it, it was muscle memory, waiting like an old friend. "Former Air Force pilot, you're not alone." He tried to laugh, but it came out as a gasp. "Captain's out. Heart attack, I think. He collapsed as soon as we hit the strike." "I've been trying." His words fractured, his breath ragged. I scanned the instruments, the alarms shrieking like panicked birds. One engine dead, the other straining, bleeding power, altitude dropping faster than comfort allowed. The stick fought back, heavy and stubborn. The aircraft was wounded, but not gone. Not yet. "Listen to me," I said, my voice sharp with command. "You've done enough. Hold pressure on the radios. Keep comms open if you can. I'll fly." For a second, he hesitated, pride flickering even through pain. Then he nodded, his hand trembling as he released the yoke. The weight shifted into mine, solid, demanding, familiar. It was like slipping back into skin I thought I had shed. The headset hung above me. I pulled it down, the foam cool against my ear. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Flight 267, Paris to New York. Dual emergency. Captain incapacitated, first officer injured. Request immediate vectors for emergency landing." My voice was calm level, drilled by years of repetition. Calm is contagious in a cockpit. You must give it if you want to keep it. The radio crackled. "Flight 267, Roger, mayday. Say souls on board." 312. The number lodged in my chest like a stone. 312 lives, not statistics, not cargo, people, children, families, even Clara. Each one a weight on my hands, my choices. The first officer leaned back, groaning softly, his eyes half closed. I reached out, squeezed his shoulder. "Stay with me. I'll get us down." Have you ever felt the moment when purpose slams into you like a wave? When all the noise, the doubts, the insults, the labels falls silent and only the task remains? That's what it felt like then. Clara's words, the funeral whispers, the cruel erasures, they all vanished. All that remained was the sky, the machine, the fragile thread of life depending on me. The intercom buzzed. a flight attendant's voice, quivering. "Ma'am, Captain, what should we tell the passengers?" I pressed the button. "Tell them we have a pilot at the controls. Tell them to stay seated, stay calm, and tell them," I paused, choosing the truth they could carry. "Tell them we're going home." I could almost hear the ripple that carried through the cabin like wind bending wheat. Hope is fragile, but it spreads fast. The plane bucked again, the dead engine dragging us sideways. I adjusted, steadying, coaxing the wounded bird back to balance. The runway I needed was still far, a thin promise on a distant map. But I had hands that remembered. I had breath that steadied. And I had a watch in my pocket ticking its relentless faith. Behind me, Clara's voice rose faintly, muffled through the door, demanding answers, demanding order. I ignored it. For the first time in our lives, her voice didn't matter. Do you know that moment when you realize the person who belittled you, who doubted you, is now powerless before your competence? Have you lived that? If you have, then you understand the peculiar mix of sorrow and strength that fills you. It isn't triumph. Not exactly. It's something deeper. A reclamation. I glanced at the first officer again. His eyes fluttered, his breath shallow, but he whispered, "Bring them down safe." "I will," I promised. And as I tightened my grip, the plane shuddering around me, I knew this was more than survival. This was vindication. This was the truth my father had always seen, wrapped in brass and ticking in my pocket. This was the moment everything began to turn. The cockpit was alive with warnings, red lights pulsing like wounded hearts, alarms crying out in fractured rhythm. The air smelled of heat and fear. I steadied my hands on the yoke, the weight of 312 lives anchoring me in a way no insult, no dismissal ever had. Behind the reinforced door, the cabin boiled with panic. I could hear it even through the barrier, the wails of children, the jagged voices of grown men, the metallic clatter of trays tumbling. The sound of chaos is distinct. It has no single note, only a cacophony of loss fighting not to happen. The intercom buzzed again. "They're screaming back here," the attendant said, her voice stretched thin. They're losing it. What do I tell them?" "Tell them I'm flying," I answered. The words left my mouth before I realized how much I needed to hear them myself. I'm flying, not broken, not erased. Flying. But chaos doesn't quiet on command. A fist slammed against the cockpit door, muffled but forceful. Clara's voice pierced through, shrill with terror. "Maya, open this door. You can't be in there. You'll kill us all." The first officer stirred, his head lifting weakly from where he slumped. His bloodied face turned toward me, eyes half closed but steady. "Don't listen," he rasped. "She doesn't know you do." His faith, fragile, painful, hit me harder than Clara's contempt ever could. It was a passing of torch, a recognition from someone who understood what it meant to hold a machine between life and death. The plane lurched again, hard enough to toss the crew manuals off their racks. I countered, muscle memory guiding me, every nerve screaming for precision. One good engine, one dead. We were gliding, not flying, and glide alone would not carry us home. On the other side of the door, Clara's fists pounded again. "You're a failure, Maya. You always have been. Give the controls to someone who knows what they are doing." Her voice cracked into sobs, the brittle veneer of power shattering into desperation. And in that moment, I felt no anger, only clarity. Because the truth was, I did know what I was doing. All the years of training, the deployments, the missions, they had built me for this exact crucible. The world might have chosen Clara to inherit a fortune, but fate had chosen me to inherit this moment. Have you ever felt it? The instant, when the very insults, meant to bury you, become fuel for your fire. When the doubt of others carves a path straight into your resolve. If you have, then you know what steadied my hands as the altimeter bled numbers I didn't want to see. The radio crackled, a voice from air traffic control sharp and urgent. "Flight 267, radar shows rapid descent. Do you have control?" I pressed the button. "Affirmative." One engine out, partial control. Request nearest viable runway. Copy, Flight 267, diverting you to Shannon. Runway 32, you're 20 minutes out if you can hold. If, a small word sharp as glass, I tightened my grip. We'll hold. Minutes stretched like hours. Every vibration of the fuselage, every flicker of light, every creak in the frame was a question. Could we make it? Would the engine last? Would the wounded officer stay conscious long enough to help me read out the endless stream of warnings? Each moment was a negotiation with gravity. Behind me, the pounding on the door slowed, then stopped. Clara's sobs dimmed into muffled prayers. The storm of the cabin quieted too, exhaustion replacing hysteria, silence wrapping itself around fear like a shroud. I focused on breath. In, out, the same rhythm I had once used in desert firefights when every second might be your last. Breath steadies the hands, breath steadies the sky. The first officer coughed, blood staining his collar. "You've got it," he whispered. "Don't let it scare you." "I'm not scared," I said, and it was true. For the first time in years, I wasn't. The horizon appeared ahead, faint lights glittering in the Irish dark. A runway, a promise. Hope is dangerous, but in that moment it was everything. But hope can falter. The good engine coughed, sputtered, shivered under the weight of too much asked for too long. The plane shuddered, nose tipping lower than safety allowed. Warnings screamed, metallic and merciless. The cabin erupted again. Screams, prayers, chaos reborn. Clara's voice rose above them all, breaking through the barrier, raw and ragged. "Maya, please don't let me die." For the first time in my life, my sister's voice didn't carry disdain. It carried need, fear, dependence. And in it I heard the truth. She had never been the strong one. She had only ever borrowed strength from circumstance. Now, stripped of circumstance, she reached for me. I leaned into the controls, teeth clenched, muscles burning. "We're not dying today," I whispered, not to her, not to anyone, but to myself, to the ghosts, to the memory of my father whose watch ticked steady in my pocket. Do you hear me, listeners? This is the heartbeat of survival. It doesn't roar. It doesn't boast. It whispers. And if you've ever been in your own fight, if you've ever been counted out but still stood up, then you know the power of that whisper. The lights of Shannon grew brighter, a strip of salvation cutting through the dark. The controls fought me, heavy and trembling, but I fought back. Every insult, every dismissal, every scar, they became strength in my veins. Clara's fear, the passenger's hope, the first officer's faith, my father's watch, all of it converged here now. The altimeter screamed. The ground rushed closer, and still I held. And in that final moment before descent claimed us, I knew this story would not be about falling. It would be about the choice to rise. The runway lights bled out of the darkness like a necklace scattered on black velvet, distant but real, a promise I could almost touch if I held the plane steady long enough. Every alarm in the cockpit insisted we were running out of luck. I chose not to argue with the alarms. I argued with gravity instead. The first officer shifted in his seat, breath catching, eyes glassy but focused. He had the look I've seen in mirrors, pain held off with purpose. "Can you hold radios?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Calm is a tool. Wield it or it will wield you." He swallowed, nodded, fingers finding the push-to-talk as if the switch itself could hold him upright. "Shannon Tower, Flight 267 Mayday established, single-engine captain incapacitated, request priority landing." His words broke in places, but the message got through. A voice answered, tight but steady, the kind of steadiness you're grateful for when the world tilts. 267, Shannon Tower. Wind 290 at 12. Runway 32, emergency equipment standing by. You are cleared to land. Cleared to land. 2 words that felt like a hand on my back. Still the plane bucked, heavy, resentful, like a wounded animal testing the fence. I eased in rudder to counter the yaw, coaxed the nose to honest, trimmed for the stubborn pull of asymmetry. 1,000 hours of training rearranged themselves into one clean instruction: fly the airplane. Everything else is a paragraph you can read later. Behind the door, the cabin roiled, metallic clatter, a child's sob, a man's voice praying in a language my ear didn't recognize. Underneath it all, I heard the smallest sound of all: my father's pocket watch, tucked against my ribs, ticking like a heartbeat that refused to decide this was the end. Tell me, have you ever clung to something that small and believed it could anchor something this big? If you have, you already understand the kind of courage that looks ordinary from the aisle. The first officer's hand trembled toward the checklist binder. Engine out, single engine approach, hydraulic partial. He flinched when his injured side protested. I took the binder from him with one hand, never letting the other drift from the yoke. I've got memory items, I said. You call altitudes, keep me honest. He exhaled like a man laying down a weight and nodded. Aviate, navigate, communicate, he said, almost a prayer. I felt the words settle inside me like bones in their sockets. I keyed the intercom. This is the flight deck. I didn't say captain, I didn't say my name. Words can inflame or they can soothe, choose carefully. We are on final approach. Stay seated, belts tight. Help the person next to you if they are struggling. We're going to be okay. A pause. We're going home. You could feel the cabin's response even through the sealed door. Not cheers, not yet. Something quieter. The way panic loosens when it has a direction to walk in. Clara's voice rose faintly, no longer sharpened to a blade, more like wet paper tearing. Maya, please. It brushed the back of my neck and was gone. I let it pass. For once, I didn't need her to understand me or praise me or even apologize. I needed a center line. The first officer called it out, a mantra to keep us both anchored. 2,000 on profile, speed high by 5, correct. I brought the power down on the good engine a fraction, felt the airframe sigh and then hold. In the periphery, red trucks lined the runway like guardians, lights strobed across wet pavement. Clouds shredded around us in graying veils, the lights brightened, steadier now, like someone turning up the world. Gear down, I said. His hand went for the lever. The right main thunked down and locked with a satisfying, righteous clack. The left hesitated, a heartbeat too long, the cockpit holding its breath with us. Then down. Locked. One less argument to have with physics. Flaps 20. The plane ballooned the way a wounded bird lifts when it knows the ground, wanting to help and getting in its own way. I eased the nose, coaxed the drag to be an ally, not an enemy. Tower says you're high and hot, he murmured. I know, I said. I'm trading speed for certainty. We only get one flare. I'd rather land long than bounce. I didn't say what we both knew. A bounce on one engine can turn an airplane into a headline. Breathe. Don't bargain with numbers, obey them. Outside, the runway extended itself like a hand. Rain had slicked it to a sheen. Crosswind toyed with the nose like an impetuous child. Wind at 12, right to left, the first officer said, voice thinning. 500 to minimums. His next words were softer. You've got this. Have you ever been given a sentence like that at the exact right second? A sentence so simple it feels like a blessing. Maybe you have. Maybe someone, years ago, stood beside your worst moment and said a version of the same thing. If they did, hold them in your memory with both hands. Those are the people who keep planes in the air. The radio crackled again. 267, you're clear all the way, no traffic. Say intentions if unable. Unable is not on the table, I answered before I could edit the truth. 267 continuing. 400 feet. The ground grew texture. Grooves cut in asphalt, the faint smear of tire rubber, the night damp shimmering like breath. A warning barked that we were high. Another warned that we were slow. Machines hate compromise, pilots live in it. I glanced at the engine instruments. Temperatures were flirting with the line between faithful and foolish. "Come on, you stubborn miracle," I whispered, not to the plane, not really, but to myself. 300, he said, each number a rung on a ladder. A little right of center line, correcting. I feathered rudder, aligned the nose. It was all shoulder and wrist and a heart refusing to stutter. 200, sink rate a hair fast. I see it. 100. One last glance at the watch, tick, not for luck, for rhythm. 50, I eased back. 40. The world narrowed to a strip of light and a feel in my hands I never truly forgot. 30, 20, 10. We kissed the runway, then slammed it. Not pretty. Pretty is for air shows. This was survival. The airframe shuddered in the first long second, then grabbed. I dropped the nose, threw the spoilers, felt them bite and dump lift like a truth you can't dress anymore. Reverse on the good engine only. Asymmetric drag grabbed our shoulders and tried to spin us. I fought it with my feet, legs braced, drawing a line down the center of the world and daring anything to pull us off it. Brakes howled. Tires screamed. The end lights surged closer, the fence beyond them a dark mouth waiting to swallow. "Come on," I said, through my teeth now, not to anyone, just to momentum itself. Come on, come on. We slowed from terror to fear, fear to doubt, doubt to hope. 60 knots. 40. 20. The fence no longer a threat, just a fence again. We rolled to a stubborn, beautiful stop. Nose on the center line, the plane panting in metal, the cockpit lit like a chapel after midnight. Silence, real silence, arrived like a benediction. The alarms ran out of things to say. My hands were still on the yoke, knuckles white, sweat cold enough to sting. The first officer made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Well," he said, and then he swallowed the rest. I didn't move for 3 breaths. Then I did what training demands even when everything inside you wants to sit and weep. I set the parking brake, brought the remaining engine to idle, and keyed the PA. "We are on the ground," I said. My voice didn't shake. I'll always be grateful for that. "Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Emergency crews will assist us shortly. You did well. We'll get you off safely." You could feel it, that ripple again, but different now. Relief rides differently than fear. It collapses and then gathers itself, setting down what it can, holding what it must. Somewhere in the cabin, a child laughed the way children laugh when they don't know which part was the danger and which part was the miracle. I turned to the first officer. "You with me?" He nodded, then grimaced. "I'm not pretty, but I'm here." "Pretty's for air shows," I said, and for the first time since Paris, I almost smiled. "You did enough." He glanced toward the captain's still form, slumped where a captain should never be. Emergency crews would take him first. We both knew it. We both knew something else, too. I reached across briefly and rested my hand on the first officer's forearm. "You're not alone," I said. He closed his eyes, and I looked away to give him that small privacy. Red strobes washed the cockpit. A voice at the base of the jet's nose shouted through a bullhorn that help was coming. The door behind us clicked, and the purser's face appeared, white as linen, eyes wet. Is it over?" "The landing is," I said. "The rest is beginning." She nodded, wiped her cheek with the back of her hand in that unself-conscious way people do when they don't have time to be elegant, and went to coordinate the evacuation that wasn't. We wouldn't jump slides. We didn't need the drama. Stairs were rolling. Lives would unspool down them in careful, countable lines. In the brief minutes before the door opened and the world rushed in, I let myself breathe all the way to the bottom of my lungs. Have you had a moment like that, when the danger ends but your body hasn't gotten the memo yet? When your cells still think they are burning? Here's the truth they don't write on plaques. Sometimes surviving isn't loud. Sometimes it's the simple grace of breath that doesn't feel barbed. The cockpit door eased wider. Clara stood framed there, her face scrubbed raw of its armor, mascara smudged into a bravery she hadn't earned. For a heartbeat, she looked at me as if I were a stranger. Then recognition swept in behind the shock. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You," she managed. You landed it. I kept my hands on the panel. We landed it, I said, nodding toward the first officer. Truth matters in small places. The crew, too. Her jaw worked, as if a lifetime of fluent cruelty had left her without a word for this dialect. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you." The syllables sounded like a foreign language on her tongue. I didn't take pleasure in it. I took note. "Help the others," I said gently. "That's what comes next." She nodded, the motion jerky, and was gone. The absence of her was almost as loud as her presence had always been. Paramedics climbed the stairs, faces set in the efficient kindness of people who have learned to work fast in the presence of pain. They took the captain first. They took the first officer next. He squeezed my hand once, a pulse of gratitude that needed no words. "You ever fly commercial?" he murmured as they started to move him. I tipped my head toward the window where rain stitched the night. I had the best seat already. He laughed, winced, and let himself be taken. I sat alone in the cockpit for a count of 10, letting my palms lift from the yoke, breaking the last small bond between us with care, the way you would set down something fragile you were afraid to wake. Then I stood, knees arguing with me about what they'd been asked to do, and stepped into the aisle. People watched me the way you watch sunrise after a bad night, cautious at first, then warm. Not all of them understood what they were seeing. They didn't need to. The man in the sports team hoodie met my eye and nodded a thank you so deep it looked like a bow. The teenager beside him clutched his hand as if she were anchoring herself to tomorrow. A little boy near row 4 asked, "Are you the pilot?" His voice held that solemn curiosity children save for priests and firefighters. I knelt so we were eye to eye. "Tonight I was," I said. "Tomorrow I might be a student again." He considered that, then grinned the way only the young and the saved can. "My mom says we can do hard things," he said. "She's right," I told him. "You just saw it. We deplaned in measured currents." Cool Irish air slid its hand along my face like blessing. The tarmac smelled of fuel and wet concrete, of survival and headache. Cameras hovered behind a line they weren't yet permitted to cross. Lenses are always hungry. I turned my head. This story didn't belong to them yet. It belonged to the woman still sobbing quietly into her hands near the stair bottom, and to the elder with trembling legs who kept saying he couldn't believe the ground took him back, and to the flight attendant who leaned against a service truck and let herself be human for 30 whole seconds before composing herself again. "Do you need a breath? Take one with me now. In the quiet between sirens, remember this part. Not the flash, not the interview, not the headline, the breath. The way it goes in and out and costs nothing and is worth everything." A uniformed official approached, words already lined up, procedures, statements, investigations. He had the strained politeness of someone who knows gratitude should be first and paperwork will be. "Ma'am, MS. Torres," I supplied. "MS. Torres will need your account of." "You'll have it," I said. Not an argument, a boundary. Clara hovered a few yards back, a shape I knew as well as my own shadow and almost didn't recognize. She didn't come closer. She didn't leave. Her phone hung useless in her hand, a relic from a life that had, for one ungoverned hour, lost jurisdiction. Her eyes sought mine, then skittered away. For the first time since I was a little girl, I felt no desire to be seen by her. I had been seen by something larger, by the night itself, by the truth of what my hands could do. I found a quiet corner of the operations building where they'd ushered us. Fluorescent lights, bad coffee, too many forms. I sat, wrapped my hands around a paper cup that had surrendered its heat 2 minutes ago, and finally took the watch from my pocket. The glass was scuffed. The face was elegant in a way men of my father's generation loved, spare and certain. The second hand swept without falter. I pressed it to my sternum, where the aftershocks still skittered, and let their two rhythms braid. A man in reflective gear paused when he saw me, then gave me a shy thumbs up he immediately seemed to regret for its earnestness. I returned it with enough seriousness to let him off the hook. "MS, Torres," a voice said, and I looked up to find a woman in an airline blazer, a clipboard clutched so tight the plastic creaked. Her jaw was set in the way of people determined to do their job well enough to sleep later. "We're grateful. We also have procedures. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry for safety," I said. "Ask what you need." She sat, and to her credit, the first thing she asked wasn't about liability. "Are you okay?" I considered the question the way you consider a foreign coin in your palm. "I'm breathing," I said. "That's new enough." She nodded, eyes wet, then blinked the softness back into a file folder. "We'll need to record your statement. The authorities will, too. There will be attention." The words sounded like rain hitting a tin roof. I glanced at the window where dawn was still hours away. "It can wait until your passengers are done being checked. Start with them." She hesitated, as if the company manual had not included a chapter titled Decency in the Aftermath, then stood. "We'll do that. Minutes or an hour. Time loses its edges after the edge. Later." Clara lowered herself into the chair opposite me as if every muscle ached. For once, her entrance didn't rearrange the room. She looked smaller, like a landscape without its usual weather. We sat in a silence that felt different than the old ones, less like a stalemate, more like a crossroads. Finally, she said, "All my life I thought control was this." She gestured vaguely toward the world that had always belonged to her, schedules, signatures, the exact right table at the exact right restaurant. "Tonight, I learned its hands on a yoke and a voice that doesn't shake." "You learned what it is for me," I said. "Yours might look different." She studied me. "I've spent years defining you. It's like I've been trying to keep you small because it made me feel large." The admissions sounded expensive, like something she'd never meant to pay for. "You didn't keep me small," I said gently. "I agreed to be." She flinched as if I'd struck her. I hadn't. Truth just sometimes sounds like that. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now the medics do their jobs, the investigators do theirs, and I folded my fingers around the watch. We go on." She nodded slowly. "I don't know how to fix it," she said. "Any of it." "I didn't land to fix us," I said. "I landed to keep 312 strangers breathing." She swallowed. "Thank you," she said again, less like a foreign phrase this time, more like a first word in a new language. I didn't tell her she was welcome. I didn't tell her I forgave her. Both would be true and untrue at once. Instead, I asked, "Do you want to help the mother in the corner get a blanket? She hasn't stopped shivering." Clara rose, clipped steps replaced by something humbler, and crossed the room with a purpose that wasn't a performance. You can't put that on a plaque, either. You can put it in your pocket like a note to yourself for later. Outside, beyond the glass, the airplane rested under floodlights, paint scuffed, courage spent, a survivor like the rest of us. Fire crews ran their slow, careful hands over her skin. A mechanic stood with a clipboard, and the stance of someone who would not be going home before sunlight. I felt a kinship with them that had nothing to do with title and everything to do with chosen duty. If you've made it this far with me, if you felt your own pulse stutter when the wheels met the world, I want to ask you something small that matters. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that competence can be quiet and heroism can be ordinary. Like this video if this turning point set something down inside you. Subscribe if you want to keep walking with me through what came next. The questions, the headlines, the rooms where people who weren't there tried to decide what this night should mean. Because what came next was not rest. It was scrutiny. It was paperwork stamped with doubt and underlined with admiration that did not know how to say its own name. It was the long corridor from miracle to meeting, from landing to ledger. It was chapter 4. But that is for another breath, another lantern lit against a different kind of dark. For now, remember this, the moment of decision is rarely a trumpet blast. It is a woman unlatching her seat belt when every voice that ever tried to define her says, "Sit down." It is a watch ticking in a pocket that didn't receive an inheritance and didn't need one. It is hands on a yoke that only look steady because the heart learned long ago how to fly frightened and true at the same time. We landed. We lived. And in the silence that followed, something else took off. Something without wings or metal or a tail number. Call it dignity. Call it a life reclaimed. Call it the beginning of everything that was always waiting. The morning after the landing, I woke not to alarms, not to the grind of engines or the rattle of turbulence, but to silence. A silence so thick it almost hurt my ears. I sat up on the stiff cot in the small room the airline had given me, feeling the ache in my arms and the bruises rising beneath my skin. Survival leaves its fingerprints in more ways than one. For a long time, I just sat there, my father's watch in my hand, its ticking louder than my own heartbeat. 312 people were alive because of me, because I had done what instinct and training demanded. And yet, even in that stillness, I felt the shadow of doubt already creeping in. Do you know that feeling when triumph hasn't even cooled in your blood, but you sense the questions waiting just outside the door? By noon, the questions came. Reporters swarmed the terminal, cameras flashing like storms. They called me hero. They said miracle. They wanted my tears, my story, my soundbite. They wanted me to smile into the lens as though survival was a performance you could rehearse. I gave them as little as possible because I knew what was coming next. I knew the world always gives its praise with one hand and suspicion with the other. The airline executives arranged a press conference. I stood in front of banners with logos I didn't care about, lights that blinded more than they illuminated. My name echoed across the speakers, but instead of relief, I felt exposed, as if every scar on my body, every sleepless night, every classified report of panic attacks and VA therapy sessions might be laid bare under those lights. One reporter's question sliced through the noise. "MS, Torres, is it true you were discharged from the Air Force for psychological reasons? Should someone with your record have been at the controls of a passenger aircraft?" There it was, the blade I had been waiting for. Not applause, not gratitude, doubt, suspicion dressed as concern. The silence in the room swelled, waiting for me to break. I breathed once, twice, the way I used to before missions. And I said, "I was discharged with honor after serving my country in combat. I carry scars, yes, but scars are proof of survival, not disqualification. 312 people are alive because I knew what to do when it mattered. If you want to call that instability, you're welcome to. I call it service." The room shifted. Some eyes softened, some hardened further. That is the way of truth. It doesn't win everyone, but it steadies you. Still, the questions didn't stop. Investigators from the airline, representatives from the FAA, suits with folders thicker than my service record. They combed through everything, my flight hours, my discharge papers, my therapy notes, even the prescriptions I once filled. Their faces were polite masks, but I saw the calculation beneath. Was I savior or liability, hero or hazard? At night, when the world quieted, I sat in the hotel room they assigned me and stared at the watch. I thought of my father's voice, calm and unwavering. "Time tells the truth, Maya. Not always quickly, but it does." I wanted to believe him. Did I still? And then Clara entered the story again, not in the way I expected, but in the way life enjoys delivering its sharpest twists. The lawyers summoned me for a hearing about my father's estate. I almost didn't go. What did it matter anymore? I had bigger battles, but something in me, the same instinct that once told me a storm was coming before the radar did, urged me to appear. The courtroom smelled of varnished wood and cold air. Clara was there, radiant as ever, dressed in her perfection, but her eyes held a nervous flicker. For the first time, I saw cracks in her armor. The judge read through the will, the disinheritance, the justification of unstable condition. And as the words settled like ash, my attorney slid a folder across the table. Inside, forged documents, signatures traced but not genuine, evaluations altered. Clara's work, Clara's lie. The courtroom went still. Clara's face drained, then flushed, then hardened in desperate denial. She shouted about lies, about misunderstandings, about my unfitness. But the evidence spoke louder than her words. For years, she had painted me as the broken one. For years, she had rewritten the story of who we were, who I was, to suit her hunger for control. And in that moment, under the gavel's shadow, the truth came undone. The court stripped her of inheritance rights. The estate returned to its rightful shape. And the world saw, at last, not the version Clara had created, but the one my father had trusted all along. Do you know what it feels like to be vindicated after years of silence? It isn't triumph. It isn't vengeance. It is something quieter. Like standing on solid ground after being told for years the earth beneath you was quicksand. The news broke quickly. Hero pilot vindicated in inheritance scandal. Sister exposed for fraud. Reporters swarmed again, now eager for a different kind of story. Redemption, betrayal, justice served. I let them write their words. But I knew that what mattered was not the headlines. What mattered was that when I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw doubt staring back. The FAA closed their investigation weeks later. Their final statement read, Ms. Torres acted with extraordinary competence under extreme circumstances. Her prior medical history does not negate her performance or decision-making ability during Flight 267. No evidence of impairment was found. Those words did not erase the scars. They did not undo the sleepless nights or the stares of suspicion. But they restored something more valuable, my dignity. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon outside my window, I asked myself a question I'll ask you now. What is revenge truly? Is it watching the one who hurt you crumble? Or is it living so fully, so unapologetically, that their cruelty has no soil left to root in? For me, revenge was not Clara's downfall. Revenge was breathing deeply without shame. Revenge was knowing that 312 people still walked the earth because of my hands. Revenge was silence, the kind filled with peace, not erasure. And yet, part of me grieved for Clara, for the sister who could have chosen love, who could have chosen kinship, but chose envy instead. Watching her escorted out of the courtroom, shoulders slumped, I felt no joy. Only a sadness that family, when twisted by greed, can become stranger than strangers. If you've followed me this far, I want to pause here and ask, have you ever been betrayed by the very person who should have stood beside you? How did you carry that weight? Did you let it bury you, or did you carve strength from it? Share your story if you feel called to. I promise you are not alone in it. As for me, Chapter 4 ended not with applause or condemnation, but with clarity. I was no longer the unstable one. I was Maya Torres, veteran, pilot, daughter, survivor, and the truth, long buried under Clara's lies, had finally taken flight. What came next was not about courts or cabins. It was about building something new, about turning vindication into foundation, about choosing what kind of life to construct from the rubble. And that, my friends, is a story for another chapter. In the months that followed the landing, my life felt like standing in the eye of a storm. The chaos had passed, the sky had calmed, yet I knew the world was still watching, waiting to see if I would stumble. The courts had restored my name, the FAA had cleared my record, and the headlines had called me a hero. But inside, I knew I had to decide what kind of story I wanted my life to tell next. Would I live in the shadow of vindication, or would I choose to build something brighter? The inheritance and compensation that returned to me felt heavy at first, as if money could ever make up for lost years, for nights of silence, for the ache of being unseen by my own blood. But then I thought of the watch in my pocket. My father had never been a man of many words, yet he left me something timeless. His belief that time, when used well, could carve hope out of despair. I wanted to use mine well, so I began to dream of a foundation. Not a monument to myself, but a runway for others, young women with calloused hands and wide eyes who dreamed of wings but were told they weren't meant to fly. I named it the Skyrise Foundation. It would offer scholarships, training, mentorship. It would be the place I had once needed but never found. Starting wasn't easy. Paperwork, bureaucracy, board approvals, it was a different kind of battle. But for once, I didn't feel alone. Veterans I had served with reached out, saying, "We'll help." Passengers I had saved sent letters, saying, "We want to give back." Even strangers donated, saying, "Your courage gave me courage." Have you ever felt that ripple, when something you thought was just survival becomes the spark of 1,000 other lives? If you have, then you know what steadied me through every sleepless night drafting the bylaws and every exhausting meeting with lawyers. When the foundation finally opened its doors, the air smelled of new paint and possibility. The first class of cadets lined up in pressed uniforms that didn't quite fit, their shoes a little too shiny, their eyes a little too nervous. I walked past them, remembering the weight of my own first uniform, the thrill and the terror of stepping into a role bigger than myself. "You don't have to be fearless," I told them. "You just have to be steady when it counts." And then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. The handwriting was hesitant, the kind that belonged to someone who wasn't sure if they had the right to ask. It was signed by Clara's daughter, Alina. She wrote, "Aunt Maya, I've watched everything you've done. I don't want to be like my mother, I want to be like you. Can I apply?" I sat with that letter for a long time, my fingers trembling over the words. Clara's betrayal was carved deep in me, but here was her child, innocent, searching, reaching across the chasm her mother had dug. What would you have done if you were me? Would you have turned away to punish the sister who never believed in you? Or would you have opened the door? Knowing forgiveness doesn't erase pain, but it can plant something new. I chose to open the door. The day Alina arrived at the foundation, she stood small and uncertain, her hair pulled back too tight, her backpack too heavy. When our eyes met, I saw both her mother and myself reflected there, two women on opposite ends of a wound and a girl who still had a chance to choose differently. She whispered, "Thank you for letting me come." I knelt, so we were eye to eye, and said, "You don't have to thank me. Just promise me you'll fly for yourself, not for anyone else's shadow." She nodded, and in her eyes I saw something I hadn't seen in Clara's for years, hope unpoisoned by envy. The foundation grew. Alina thrived. The cadets learned not only to navigate the sky, but to navigate the weight of being underestimated, dismissed, told they couldn't. And I learned, too, that victory doesn't have to roar. Sometimes it whispers through the laughter of young women running drills at dawn, or through the steady hum of an engine taking them higher than they ever thought possible. One evening, as the sun slipped below the horizon and the cadets trained in the glow of floodlights, I stood on the balcony of the hangar and asked myself, was this revenge? Or was it something better? Perhaps true revenge isn't about destroying those who doubted you. Perhaps it's about creating a future so bright that their doubt burns away on its own. If you've walked with me through this story, I want to ask you, what would your quiet victory look like? What's the thing you could build, not to spite someone else, but to prove to yourself that you were always enough? Think about it. Share it if you want to. Someone out there might need your vision as much as you once needed hope. As for me, my story didn't end with a courtroom or a cockpit. It ended here, in a circle completed, a wound transformed. Clara never came to the foundation, but sometimes I would catch her watching Alina from a distance at graduations, her face softened by something like regret. We never spoke about it, we didn't have to. Some reconciliations are spoken, others are lived through the next generation. And so the circle closed not with vengeance but with flight. I am Maya Torres. I was called broken, forgotten, erased. But I rose. I chose to build, not burn. And in the end, that was the strongest revenge of all. There is a certain quiet that follows storms. Not the silence of absence, but the hush of survival, the kind where every breath feels heavier and more precious. That's the quiet I live in now. Looking back on all of it, the jeers, the betrayals, the cockpit lit with alarms, the courtroom revelations, and finally the sound of young cadets reciting their first aviation pledges. I know this story was never just about one flight. It was about how truth, no matter how long it's buried, eventually finds a way to rise. Family can wound us deeper than strangers. Sometimes envy and disdain can stretch across a lifetime, leaving scars no one else sees. But here's what I've learned. Lies may wear crowns for a season, but dignity wears eternity. In the end, my sister's words could not erase my father's quiet faith in me or the steady truth of who I was. Have you ever carried that kind of hurt, where the people you love most are the ones who try hardest to keep you small? If you have, I hope you remember this. Time tells the truth. It may not arrive when you want it to, but it always arrives. And to every woman who has worn the uniform or dreamed of serving or been told she is too fragile, too emotional, too much or not enough, let my story stand as proof. Courage doesn't ask permission. Strength doesn't come stamped with approval. When the world doubted me, when even my own family dismissed me, it was the years of service, the nights of vigilance, the discipline carved into me that steadied my hands at 11,000 meters. Being a woman in uniform doesn't make you less. In crisis, it makes you more. As for revenge, it took me years to understand that vengeance is not fire and destruction. Real revenge is not proving your enemy wrong. Real revenge is living so fully, so unshakably, that their judgment withers in the face of your life. I didn't defeat Clara by exposing her in court, though truth had its day. I defeated her envy by refusing to let it define me, by building something that outlives us both. I chose to rise, and that is the loudest answer of all. So I leave you with this. If you've ever been mocked, doubted, discarded, remember that your greatest response is not to destroy, but to build. Build peace. Build strength. Build a life so radiant that no insult can eclipse it. That is the kind of victory that whispers louder than any shout. Now, I want to ask you, what storm have you lived through that shaped you into who you are? What quiet victories have you claimed in the aftermath of being underestimated? If this story stirred something in you, I hope you'll share it. Your voice might be the very reminder someone else needs tonight. And before we close, I have one last request. If this journey with me has touched your heart, if it's reminded you that dignity and resilience always find their wings, then don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Here, every week, we'll walk together through stories of soldiers, survivors, and ordinary people who turned pain into power. Stories that remind us that even in the darkest hours, there is light to be found. And sometimes that light is you. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just my story. It's ours. The story of every person who chose to rise, not in fury, but in quiet, unshakable strength. Thank you for walking this path with me. And until the next story, remember, the silence of success speaks louder than the noise of doubt.